Welcome back, everybody. If you'll notice, in some modern translations, there's a set of brackets that follows verse 8 of the last chapter of Mark's Gospel. Some translations include a note that reads, "Some of the earliest manuscripts do not include 16:9 through 20. For some Muslims, as ignorant of biblical text criticism as they are of Quranic text criticism, this gives them an opportunity to selectively draw from data and interpret it to support their preconceived conclusion that the Gospel of Mark, among others, is hopelessly corrupted." In a textbook example of a non sequitur, we read, "Finally, the fact that there is such a controversy on the ending of Mark throws the whole book into question just on this fact alone." So let's talk about the ending of the Gospel of Mark. In this video, I'm going to argue that Mark's Gospel did originally end at chapter 16, verse 8, and that ending was completely satisfactory for both Mark and for us today. When we come to the issue of the ending of the Gospel of Mark, we have a couple of options. Let's consider them. First, Mark may have intended to write more, but was prevented from doing so. Second, Mark may have written a longer ending, which is now lost. Or third, Mark may have intended to end his Gospel with verse 8. This third possibility is becoming more popular and is the most likely. Because of some reasons that we'll look at later, a somewhat enigmatic ending to the Gospel suits this strategy perfectly. But we do find longer endings to Mark's Gospel in some other manuscripts, so we want to make sure that we have sufficient reasons for disregarding them. First, it's missing from some important manuscripts. Second, Jerome and Eusebius both state that the best manuscripts available to them did not contain this longer ending. Third, two other endings to the Gospel exist, which indicates some uncertainty. Fourth, the longer ending contains several non-Markan words and expressions. Fifth, the longer ending does not flow naturally after 16:8. Carson and Moo conclude with a great majority of contemporary commentators and text critics that verses 9 through 20 were not original. But let's look at some possible difficulties in having 16:8 as the ending of Mark's Gospel. We want to look at this from two perspectives. One, the narrative perspective, and two, the philological perspective. So let's first look at the narrative concerns. Just judging from the narrative of Mark's Gospel and the form of it, is 16:8 too abrupt of an ending for Mark's Gospel? We referred to some of this previously. Mark refrains from making very many editorial comments. He lets the story speak for itself, and a somewhat enigmatic ending to the Gospel suits this strategy perfectly. Also, it was standard literary practice in ancient writings to allude to well-known events that occurred after those being narrated in the text, without actually narrating those later events. So Mark's ending isn't necessarily out of character for Mark's Gospel, and I would simply encourage you to read Mark's Gospel to see how unembellished Mark's accounts are. Very straightforward, very matter-of-fact. But what about the philological concerns? Well, let's get into a little bit of Greek. Mark 16:8 reads, "And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone." Now here is the phrase of concern, "for they were afraid." In Greek, it reads, "ephebunto gar." Now, the first difficulty is that last word, gar. It's a postpositive. That is, it's always translated first in English, but it doesn't come first in the Greek. Here, I've isolated that for you. For they were afraid. And you can see the corresponding gar in bold. So what's the problem? Well, some scholars will argue that ending a sentence in gar is prohibitively grammatically awkward, and Mark simply would not have chosen to end a sentence in gar, much less an entire gospel. However, there is much evidence to the contrary. BDAG, which is the standard Greek lexicon, says that conclusions of this kind at the end of Mark are also found in other literature. Further, Robert Lightfoot points at numerous examples in Mark where he uses this postpositive gar in short sentences. Over 20 examples can be cited, and we'll look at all of them in detail. Just kidding, we'll look at 5. From Mark 1, 5, 9, 11, and 16, and you can read through those sentences if you like, and notice the common gar in all of these. Lightfoot also directs us to a couple of examples from the Septuagint, Genesis 18 and 45, "For she was afraid, for they were very afraid." He also alludes to something that I think we saw in our series on the authorship and dating of the Gospels, namely a bias present in the work of some New Testament scholars that is not present in the work of their classicist peers. I am impressed by the very little difficulty which classical scholars, whether in print or in conversation, seem to find in it, namely Mark's Gospel ending with gar. So that's the first philological difficulty that some scholars see with Mark's Gospel ending at 16:8. I am suggesting that by no means does it preclude Mark's Gospel from ending there. What about the second philological difficulty? Well, it comes from this Greek word translated, "for they were afraid," and it's in bold for you, ephebunta. What's the problem here? Well, this word, according to some, needs something after it. It needs a direct object, it needs a may clause, it needs some sort of a conclusion. It's awkward in its absolute sense. However, Lightfoot gives us another good example from Mark 10:32. Compare "those who followed were afraid" with "for they were afraid" in Mark 16:8. He then asks if no one has seen any difficulty in this absolute use of the verb at 10:32, why should the same word cause difficulty at 16:8? Overall, I really like Lightfoot's direct treatment of these issues, which is why I'm citing his work here. When considering the three possibilities we mentioned earlier, Mark intended to proceed further but was prevented for some reason. 2, Mark did proceed further, but the ending was lost. Or 3, Mark ended his work intentionally. Lightfoot says there is no evidence of any kind whatever on behalf of either of the first two possibilities. The conclusion then seems straightforward. Mark's Gospel originally ended at 16:8. This is supported by both internal and external evidence, some of which we looked at earlier. Also, the grammatical difficulties do not present by any means an insurmountable obstacle. Now, some scribes, apparently feeling that Mark's Gospel needed some additional flair, appended some verses to the end of Mark's Gospel to give what for them was apparently a more satisfactory ending. Fortunately, through modern text critical methods, we're able to evaluate the manuscripts and arrive at a form of Mark's Gospel more closely resembling the original autograph. That's it. There's no room or no need for Islamic conspiracy theories. But why do these conspiracy theories exist? Why the constant, tiresome, emotional proclamations by Muslims that the Bible is hopelessly corrupted? Well, in Surah 7, it says that the messenger, presumably Muhammad, is written in the Torah and the Gospel. Muslims therefore have two options. Number one, they can find Muhammad in the Torah or Gospel as the Quran claims, and we've highlighted some of the sheer stupidity of this enterprise in some videos on this channel. Or number two, they can claim that Allah allowed the Torah and Gospel to become corrupt, in which case clear references to Muhammad have been removed. Many Muslims, in an act of supreme self-refutation, attempt to claim both of these simultaneously. But there are some other relevant issues. Most Muslims simply pretend to be on board with biblical text criticism, but do not follow it to its intended result. That is, for example, to give us an extremely accurate reconstruction of the text of the New Testament. Additionally, Muslims are going to have an increasingly difficult time claiming that the Bible is corrupted using text critical methodology and continuing to turn a blind eye to Quranic text criticism, which shows us a conspicuous absence of early Quranic manuscripts and numerous intentional changes to the Quranic manuscripts that we do have available. This wasn't supposed to happen. But let's say you're an up-and-coming warlord in 7th century Arabia, and spending a lot of time secluded in a cave wrapped in a blanket isn't doing a lot for your career. How can you increase your credibility? Well, one option is to simply claim that you're validated in a source already recognized to be authoritative. And that's exactly what Surah 7:157 is doing. I'm suggesting the writer of this verse never dreamed of a day like today when we could investigate this claim with great thoroughness. We have over 2.5 million pages of hand-copied New Testament manuscripts. It is an abundance of evidence. For the Old Testament, we can look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have Greek manuscripts, Old Latin, Syriac. We have so much evidence for the biblical text that it is almost mind-boggling. And much of this evidence is available in high-resolution images online. We can look at it ourselves. These claims are very easy to make in the vacuum of 7th century Arabia, where the claims can't easily be fully investigated by the hearers. Not so today. And when we look at all this evidence, and when we look at this claim made in Surah 7, we find the claim is dead on arrival. Truckloads of evidence show this verse to be demonstrably false. When Muslims claim the Bible is corrupted, this is not an offensive claim. They're not attacking the Bible necessarily. It is a defensive claim. It is their only option left in trying to keep their God from looking foolish. Thanks for watching.